Ne maradj le a legújabb Vakondok rész a Stems Back limitált gyűjtői kiadásáról.
Well, I've always enjoyed playing games as a hobby, from school, playing Monopoly and chess, and then later on discovering Avalon Hill games. And when I moved to London in the early 1970s, I was joined by an old school friend, Steve Jackson, and also another school friend, John Peake, and we were sharing a flat in London. And we used to play board games all the time. And we thought, wouldn't it be great if we could somehow turn our hobby of playing games into a business of making them? And so we put out a newsletter called Owl and Weasel. We sent it out to everybody we knew in games. One of the recipients was Gary Gygax, who lived in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. And although we hadn't sent it to him directly, he wrote to us and said, "Love your magazine. Here's this new game I've invented." And that game was Dungeons and Dragons. So Gary Gygax sent us a copy of Dungeons and Dragons, and we opened it, and it didn't look like very much, a very dull box, very amateurish drawing, but it opened up the whole world of your imagination like no other game before it. Here was a totally new concept in games, role-playing games where one person designed a labyrinth of rooms and passageways, populated those with monsters and treasure, and the other players, as participants, took on the roles of heroes and fighters and wizards, went on these fantastic interactive journeys of the mind, killing monsters, finding treasure. It's like instant theatre. And Steve and I became completely obsessed with Dungeons and Dragons, and we ordered 6 copies because that's all the money we had in our world. And on the back of that order, we got the exclusive 3-year distribution agreement for the whole of Europe, because what we didn't know is that Gary Gygax was also operating out of his flat. So this was the birth of the interactive games industry. John left because he hated Dungeons and Dragons, and Steve and I eventually had to move out of our flat because the landlord got fed up with us. Packages arriving all the time, people knocking on the door, hoping to find a shop. But of course, Games Workshop, as the company we called it, wasn't a shop at all. It was the top of a flat. So we ended up having to live in Steve's van for 3 months because we couldn't afford any rent, because we had to have an office. And there's a very tiny office, and we had our mail order office. And we sold Dungeons and Dragons. We opened up our first shop in 1978 and went on to open more Games Workshop shops, and then Citadel Miniatures, White Dwarf magazine. And we were immersed completely in D&D. We even created one of the advanced Dungeons and Dragons rulebooks, Fiend Folio. During this whole D&D role-playing frenzy that was going on, we wanted to try and make role-playing more accessible for rather than 6 people having to play for a long period of time, just to kind of take the element of role-playing and put it into a book format. And that's how we arrived with the Fighting Fantasy game book concept. But it wasn't until Geraldine Cook, who was working for Penguin Books, came to see one of our game days that she saw how huge and how enthusiastic role-playing gamers were. So she first asked us to write a book about games, and we said, instead of not just writing about role-playing games, let's create a role-playing game in a book format. So we wrote The Warlock of Firetop Mountain in 1981. It took Penguin Books a year to decide whether it should be a Puffin for kids or for Penguin for adults. Finally decided on Puffin. So The Warlock of Firetop Mountain came out in 1982. It got off to a really slow start, but suddenly the children discovered it. And in playgrounds, that was a viral spread at the time. It spread like wildfire because suddenly this was a book that was totally different. Normally books, as we know, is a passive experience. You may or may not like the main character, but these were books in which you, the reader, were the hero. And that was because it was so engaging, making the reader decide where to go, to turn left, turn right, kill the monster, run away. That empowerment made it a huge craze. And by 1984, these books were selling in incredible numbers and being licensed all over the world. I don't play my own Final Fantasy books, no. I enjoy creating them. I enjoy writing passages that appeal, that people think are going to be really great choices and luring people into their doom. I kind of snigger a bit when I imagine people making the choice and I know they're going to land on poison spikes or get fried by a dragon or your adventure's over, start again. But everyone cheats, so that's okay. I used to see people with the 5-fingered bookmark on the tubes and on public transport. It's like having a peek around the corner. Oh, I don't like that choice, and choose another one. But yeah, I think Fighting Fantasy is very special to me and to Steve, because it did resonate so powerfully with children of the day who've, and if I bump into people and say, "Oh, you're the Livingstone that wrote those books," and they kind of revert to childhood and have these very powerful memories of as though they were there in the world that we created. Death Trap Dungeon was the one I wrote in 1984. It topped the children's bestsellers list for the whole year. It's also number 8 book of all books sold in the UK. And that's how I met Mark Strawn and Dominic Wheatley, who just started off their brand new games development studio, Domark, and they came to ask me whether I'd be interested in writing the storyline and the game for Eureka. It wasn't the first time we were involved in video games, because Games Workshop was already retailing games in its shop, and we also had a small line that we produced ourselves for the Commodore PET. Very, very simplistic, 8-bit, if that, games in black and white for the PET. So yeah, I recognized how the future was going to be in technology. So at that point, I wanted to move my content from a physical to a digital medium, as I saw the coming of video games. These were young marketing executives. One was from advertising, and they were both advertising and marketing, and they could see the potential of the video games industry. And the UK was already got off to a flying start. It was booming in creativity because the Sinclair Spectrum and the BBC Micro was a cornerstone of computing in schools. And that really got people creating content rather than just using other people's content. So people, being a very creative nation as well, these young creative guys, because it was mainly guys back then, were using these devices to create games. And Dominic and Mark had seen the rise of explosion of content and wanted to create their own games company. But they had an idea for Eureka, which was different. They wanted to attach, because of their marketing background, a prize. And they wanted to offer the first person to get their way through and find this telephone number a £25,000 prize. Well, I was back at role-playing. I mean, this was 1984, 85, and I was still running Games Workshop with Steve Jackson, and at the same time writing Fighting Fantasy game books in the evening. So my social life was tiny. And it was, but when you love and are passionate about games like I am, work and play is the same. So I'm not saying it was hard. It was just that it was very long hours. And at the same time, I saw how the video games market was rising, and I invested in Domark personally, and I joined the company in 1992 when I sold out of Games Workshop. And so I joined the board of Domark, and Domark became, after some acquisition and mergers, IDOS. And we floated IDOS in October 1995, which is 4 companies, Domark, Simis, Big Red, and IDOS Technologies, which was the video compression company. And we decided to keep the name IDOS for the group because that sounded a bit more like a dynamic video games name. So I was appointed executive chairman of the new company, and then we started developing a lot of games. We acquired Center Gold, which was the publisher of lots of American games, also owned 2 development studios. And when we bought Center Gold, I did all the due diligence. So I've visited their studio Core Design, and in that studio in development was a young Lara Croft. So it was love at first sight, and we went on to publish Tomb Raider in November 96, and then IDOS took off, incredible growth, became a global publishing phenomenon, which was listed on the London Stock Exchange, and went from strength to strength. But I still remember the days of Eureka. A lot of people have claimed to have created Lara Croft, but it was in fact a 2D artist working at Core Design called Toby Gard. Now, Core had published a game called Rick Dangerous on PC, and Rick Dangerous was a tomb raiding style game. And with the coming of PlayStation and 32-bit machines, Core Design wanted to put PC games onto these new console platforms. And the whole industry was kind of getting its act together in terms of copyright and understanding that you can't just take other people's IP and run with it. And the last Rick Dangerous had a cover that looked a little bit, Rick Dangerous himself looked a little bit like Indiana Jones. So rather than risking the possibility of saying that's Indiana Jones, even though it wasn't, it was decided to get a new character. So Toby was asked to create a new character for the PlayStation version of what would have been Rick Dangerous. And he'd seen the rise of girl power. He'd seen Tank Girl, Nana Cherry, women were doing for themselves. And he suggested, well, why not have a female character? Because all games had male characters. Wouldn't it be good to have a female character? Because suddenly we're going to have rather than a side-scrolling game, you're going to have a 3D character moving into the screen in a 3D world. So let's watch a female character, but let's make that female character powerful so it would appeal to women as well as to men. Let's make her intelligent, strong, independent, athletic. And that's how Lara Croft was born. She was actually called Lara Cruz when she was first appeared on a piece of paper as a sketch, which I could show you later. I have that. And people, of course, said, no, that's not very English. So someone went through the phone book and came up with the name Lara Croft. And that's how Lara was born. And, the team at Core did an amazing job making this incredible game. And even though, as I said, it looked great, incredible technology, really advanced technology, beautiful graphics for the time, fantastic character, it was the gameplay that people liked the most. The fact that you had this incredible puzzle adventure with combat and exploration, and kind of an emotional engagement with the character. I mean, Tomb Raider had everything. Hitman. Well, I think it goes back to all my life. I talked about earlier about intellectual property. It's important. If you want to build value in a company, in anything you do, if you own your own IP, you determine your own future and you build in value based on that ownership rather than just being a license. So with Workshop, from White Dwarfs, from Citadel Miniatures to Warhammer, this is all our own IP, Fighting Fantasy. Steve Jackson and I still own Fighting Fantasy, the IP rights. And when I started IDOS, made a decision that all our games were going to be our own IP. So, and secondly, keeping the message simple. So Tomb Raider, you know exactly what you're going to be doing. You're going to be raiding tombs. And Hitman, you know exactly when to be, you're going to hide assassins. So keep the basic premise simple, but make the game deep and meaningful. And Hitman came really of a need to try and fit that criteria. And when we met the people from IO Interactive, who had this concept for this bald Agent 47 hired assassin, we thought, yep, that ticks all the boxes. So they had a great character, great gameplay, great technology, beautiful graphics. And so, yeah, that's how Hitman came into the stable of IDOS. These days, I very much help the next generation of games makers. I chair 10 mobile games companies, sit on various councils, vice chair of UKI, the Games Trade Association, sit on the Creative Industries Council, Creative Industries Federation, and just written a report about the creative industries. So it's trying to help the next generation in terms of making sure that they have access to finance, that the right skills are in place, that there's programmers and artists and animators, not just storytellers, how they can get further down the value chain of ownership of intellectual property, because so often is the case that games developers have to trade away their IP in return for project finance. And I think that's a great shame that they become contractors rather than IP owners. So I try and give my 40 years of being in the games industry to the next generation and help them, because it's such an amazing industry. $100 billion global revenues by 2017. 100 million people subscribing to to Steam, 100 million people watching games being played on Twitch. These are very big numbers. Games like Grand Theft Auto generated $1 billion in 3 days of sales. Is a great British success story. So games, I think, has always had a bit of a bad reputation in the general media, and quite wrong, I think, because games go beyond entertainment. If you think cognitively what's happening when you're playing a game, you're solving problems. You can't get through a game without problem solving. Games give you continuous assessments. They tell you you can fail in a safe environment. You learn intuitively when you're playing a game. The creativity in games like Minecraft, where you're building these wonderful 3D architectural worlds and sharing with your friends. Games allow you to multitask, and there's so many life skills that you gain from playing games that's never written about in the games press. They always want to write the shock horror headlines. But I think by the time all those people have disappeared off the earth, people find that games are a very good thing. A good game is a game, doesn't have to be complicated. A lot of developers make games difficult because they want to impress their developer friends. A game is a great game. When people ask me what are the 3 most important things about a game, I say gameplay, gameplay, gameplay. Art and technology play a very important role, but a supporting role. If the game is not fun and you want to play it, you're not going to play it, no matter how good it looks. Therefore, it has to have features in it that makes you want to come back to it. It has to have jeopardy. It has to have a bit of intrigue. It has to have a good storyline, but it has to have that magic fairy dust that makes you want to come back and try again. And sometimes you don't know why you were doing that, but if you can get people to replay a game, you're going to have a success on your hands. It's kind of ironic, I guess, that I joined the industry that actually resulted in my own books not being as popular as they once were. But Finding Fancy was interactive entertainment of the day. It was analog hypertext. It was enjoyed by children, the pre-digital age, but it still had that interactive quality, which you get through video games. So I think they still complement each other. It's just that technology drives innovation in games like no other entertainment medium, and therefore we see all sorts of games, from high-end interactive cinematic games played on consoles with huge production values, games like Grand Theft Auto, Tomb Raider, costing tens of millions of dollars to make, down to bedroom programmers, small teams, putting out their own content, finding new audiences, new ways of playing on mobile devices through browser games. So you've got this huge, broad arc of content, and there's something for everybody. And having said all that, Finding Fancy lives on. They've never gone out of print in France. They're still in print in the UK. Finding Fancy was 17 million copies sold globally in 32 languages. So it's quite a legacy there. And a lot of people who read them went on to join the video games industry. So I'm delighted in many ways that this inspired a whole generation of people, A, to read, but secondly, to have a career in the creative industries. People play games because play is natural. When we enter this world as babies, we interact with the world. We learn through play, through discovery, through curiosity. As we get older, we like solving puzzles, and when we attach rules to puzzles, they become games. And I think games help define us as who we are as human beings. I think we're never too young to start playing games, and we're never too old to stop. Play is just a wonderful way of social engagement, and that's why I love my board games, because I can like playing with like-minded friends around a tabletop. It's a great way and to enjoy yourself, but also there's a lot to be learned when playing games. It emulates life in many ways, and games are often written off as being sort of frivolous, and I would say they're absolutely anything but frivolous. Starting Games Workshop was amazing. And then when we saw The Warlock of Fat Top Mountain, the first Final Fantasy game book in a bookshop, that was another amazing time. Launching Tomb Raider was another very big moment in my career. More recently, things like I managed to convince the UK government to put computing on the national curriculum. I wrote a review called Next Gen, which is really saying that computer science is an essential discipline for digital world. So turned kids from being consumers of technology into creators of technology, turn their passion of playing games into being able to make them. So giving a creative nation the digital skills to be content creators rather than just content consumers. And I'm hoping that the computing curriculum will eventually deliver that. And it's not just about coding, it's computational thinking, having problem solving, communication, creativity is part of the pedagogy of the classroom. Learning by doing, I think, is key to the digital age. Preparing kids for jobs that don't yet exist rather than keep training for jobs that will no longer exist. This world is changing exponentially by technology every day, and children have to make sure that they're equipped to deal with it as digital citizens. We hear every day about robots coming to challenge jobs. Well, there's no point in making our children continue to be trained like robots in schools because they can't compete with the real thing. So they need to be able to think, problem solve, and communicate, and they'll be okay. It's hard to know what the future is next month, really, such as the speed of change in games. Clearly, virtual reality is going to be a big deal. AR is going to be a big deal. For me, mobile is still a fascinating place. I mean, that's a device that everyone carries around in their pockets. Billions of people have got games-enabled smartphones in their possession. So it's finding the right content for them. Video games using a controller was quite intimidating for a lot of people. 15 buttons on a controller. Think, I'm not clever enough for this. But along comes Apple with swipe technology. One swipe of the finger and you can become a games player. So that's opened a whole new audience for games makers to address global markets through high-speed broadband. So we're now talking about global audiences that can be reached by a very small team. So it's very exciting times. I'd say it's the second golden age of games happening right now. The video games in the early days was clearly, we were making it up as we went along. Surely, with Games Workshop, there was no precedent. We were just getting it. We probably made loads and loads of mistakes, but it didn't matter because we didn't have any competition, so we could afford to make those mistakes. But we were passionate about what we were doing, the games we were making, and we found an audience that were equally passionate, and they helped us along that journey. So it was very friendly, very kind of bohemian. We had been living in a van for 3 months. We were meeting other people who were struggling, people who were assembling things in their kitchens and pretending that they were big salesmen, putting on a suit and tie and going to big shops and saying, I'm a professional, when absolutely weren't. Again, we were role-playing businessmen about role-playing games. It was quite amusing in many ways. But when we used to meet up with other developers, we used to just play games together and just talk about what might be, because we had no idea just how big the games industry was going to become. But they were very happy times. And one nice thing about the games industry is it's not ego driven like a lot of other entertainment industries. We don't have celebrity like music and film and television. So it's the people in it are very friendly and always willing to collaborate. Even today, people are always willing to help each other, even though they are potential competitors. It's a very collaborative industry, and long may it continue like that. Well, I don't want to paint a picture that we had this sort of mystery club that people were trying to get in. It was just meeting other people informally at games days, at conventions, at early computer fairs. It was just being with other people. It wasn't any really formal. And then people saying, oh, that's a good idea. And then someone, an artist and a programmer getting together and saying, hey, let's do this. But it was very, very basic. A lot of programmers did everything up by themselves, including the art, because there wasn't a lot to play with. I mean, a game like Elite, it looks incredible now. A huge, huge game with space trading and fighting and exploration. And yet, it's done in less than 32K. That's the size of an average email. I mean, there's not a lot to play with. So you didn't need big teams. And nobody had any idea how big this industry was going to come. I mean, when I was living in that van with Steve Jackson, I didn't say, one day, Steve, I think this is going to be $100 billion industry. We didn't even think it'd be a $1 million industry. following your heart. And I say that to everybody: if you don't enjoy what you do, do something else. And I love games, and I've loved every minute. I will never retire. There's no difference between working and playing for me. This is my board games collection. I don't buy these games just because another game's come out. It's probably about 1,000 games, which I think have got something to offer in terms of game mechanic or an original theme, or has a sort of little magic bit of stuff. You think, oh, that's such a really good idea. And we play regularly every 10 days. I've been running this thing called the Games Night Club since the 1980s. It's 6 people in it. Myself, Steve Jackson, Peter Molyneux, Clive Robert, Mark Spangenthal, and Sky Quinn. Those last 2 aren't in the games industry. And I put out a newsletter every week. I've done 420 newsletters now for a circulation of 6 people. And we have a cup at the end of the year because we keep a record of the points scored. It's like a spoof of a gentleman's club. It's very tongue-in-cheek. It's not serious, by the way. And at the end of the year, the winner who won the most games gets the cup. And we all go, great. Then nobody else cares. The games industry is such a great industry to be in. The people in it are wonderful. And I've enjoyed meeting some incredibly creative and brilliant people. And it's a combination of art and science like no other entertainment medium. Bringing interactive content in digital format is not easy to do. And there's some brilliant people who have made some fantastic content that's still not recognized. The big memories, I guess, was day 1 of Workshop, day 1 of Fighting Fantasy, day 1 of Tomb Raider.